Maire, I'd like to welcome you to Kilmurry for this, our second running of the Terence MacSwiney weekend. I'd also like to welcome CATHAL MacSWINEY BRUGHA, the Reverend Fathers John Fitzgerald, our President, all the other invited guests, and ladies and gentlemen. So this, as I say, is our second running of the Terence MacSwiney weekend. The theme for this weekend this year is education. Now, education was very important to Terence MacSwiney and his sisters, as can be seen through his writings and his plays, and also through his sisters and their work with the schools in Cork. I suppose it was, how would you say, the education was seen as a tool to improve the Irish person's lot and to free them, so in such a way that they could achieve in life. So I suppose without further ado, I will hand over to CATHAL MacSwiney Brugha, who will now give the opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, congratulations. Often made Ibrahim into Limerick, agus Melina, agus Vegayin, Melish Coin. This one is done Belsaw, Rasha Kilmurry, agus this one is done and chance of how all can Larcliffe. I am aware that it's kind of cold, so I'm going to get around to it very quickly. And really, there is a story to be told about MacSwiney's in education. So last year was more the philosophy, next year is more the politics, but this year is more the education. And I just want to bring a bit of a rounding of it. And when I see the councils in front of me, one of the things that I would be hearing every year whenever I talk to any of the councillors is that this year is the 99th anniversary of the Maire of Cork visiting every school in Cork. Absolutely fantastic. Started by Terence MacSwiney. And it is an amazing thing for the schools. So it's just one of these things which is kind of like a little trivial thing, but it isn't really, it's like symbolic of what Terence MacSwiney had to do. And the kind of thing he introduced. So small but significant. Last year, very much focused on Terence MacSwiney. Next year, Terence MacSwiney as well. But this year is the MacSwiney family. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the MacSwiney family and some of the connections, because some of the things that I picked up over a long lifetime, which are really kind of fascinating for me. A teacher in the North Mon, going way back, called Brother O'Brien. And on the essays, it was always, he would just say, that's good, that's bad, that's indifferent. Always signed B.O.B. So he was known as Bob. Now, he wrote a book, and it's Dearman O'Brien, about Terence MacSwiney. And he actually gave me the last bits of stuff that he had. He was in his 90s when Kath and I visited him. And so I was talking to him about the name, and he said, no, the name. I said, well, MacSwiney, MacSwiney, where does it come from? He said, actually, it comes from C, as in the wise man. The wise person there. He said, that's what they were. They were wise people. And so, right from, because they were so-called second-level chieftains, the higher-level chieftains were like the McCarthys and the O'Donnells and so on, and they were second-level chieftains. But that meant that they got into the annals of the Four Masters, and so we can trace them back to 1200, when they actually came back from Kintyre in Scotland, where the Sini with the W-E-N-E-Y was changed to the I-N-E-Y, because over there, Sini, they thought it had something to do with pigs, swine and stuff like that. So it's a very funny thing that if you ever see the MacSwiney crest, it is a total nonsense, because it's got 3 pigs on it, nothing to do with anything. And the other one is that in the old MacSwiney map, on the crest, they have this thing, the battle axe. And there's this thing that Donegal, the English were a bit scared. Don't go there because of these nutty people with battle axes, MacSwiney on Tua. Actually, Tua was land. They had land in North Donegal. Anyway, that's the story. Don't believe any of these crests. Anyway, so that's where they start. Their link with education goes way beyond, way back. And it is a relevant thing to think of where we are now, because the founder of Europe, he actually refers back to St. Columbanus, also came from up there, who actually founded several monasteries or universities, what I like to call it, including Bobbio. So we're talking about going way back to that time. That's when the heritage came. Now, so the story then, and to move things on, is that when the planning was going to take place for the Battle of Kinsale, the McCarthy said, would you send down some people? Well, who would they send down? Well, the O'Donnells, being the major chieftains in that particular area, what did they do? For their eldest son, who was going to be the next chieftain, they had to make sure that he got well educated. So he would be sent to the MacSwineys for education. So the next thing is then, because they were kind of tribal, they didn't trust each other, each would send their eldest son to the other one. And the next thing it developed into the point where these were particularly strong, and so on. The MacSwineys developed from being educational to being educational and actually looking after other things such as security. So they then became fighters. And so when they were asked to come down here, and actually it was a McCarthy Castle, the local castle, it's a McCarthy Castle that was given to the MacSwineys, it was with a view that the MacSwineys would actually play that role, which is fighting. But they were all educational. They were educational first and then fighters. So they did, and they came down. Now, skip many generations on ahead, and you see in Kilmurry, you've got Terence MacSweeney's father. He had moved out of Kilmurry, but he heard that there was trouble in Italy. Garibaldi was attacking the Pope. So if you think of Garibaldi was more sort of the state orientated and the Pope was more education orientated. So he says, I think I better go and help the Pope. So he travels over. The only thing is they didn't have Twitter, which I don't know anything about, or WeChat or any of those things. By the time he arrived, the battle between the Pope and Garibaldi was over. So what does he do? He tries to get back. Well, he had run out of money, so where did he end up? He ended up in London. What does he end up doing to make a few quid? Teaching. And so in a school, who did he meet? Mary Wilkinson. Terence MacSweeney's mother was a Wilkinson from London. And so they met in teaching in London. Now, the interesting thing about the heritage is that the legacy they got from the Wilkinson side was very significant, because she was a very powerful, strong spiritual woman. And so you have this mix of the two families. But from then on, there was a huge connection with England. And what tended to, and a bit like in the normal situation with many families at the time, if you had children, boys and girls, you made sure that the girls got well educated. So all the girls got well educated in England, which is very interesting, because I remember my Aunt Annie, and she's talking with an Oxford accent, trying to talk Irish with an Oxford accent down in West Kerry. It's very interesting. But that's what they were like. So most of them, that was what they were. So the first few children were actually born in London. I think Terence was the first one to be born in Cork. And but the commitment was huge all the time to education. Skip forward a bit further, and we're talking about the things that are happening here and that are happening in London. And actually, if anything, the leader of the family, in some ways, in the sense of being the initiator, was Mary MacSweeney. But what she did, she was actually in the suffragette movement. She started off the Suffragette League in Munster, she was secretary of it, and she developed it in that way. And so, and again, it was freedom, it was about independence. But what were the four sisters doing? And really, I would be talking about Jerry, and I would be talking about Mary, Annie, Peg and Kit. Four sisters. All in education, but in different ways. And the stories are interesting stories in themselves. But the leader was Mary. And she was actually going to become a nun, but when the mother got sick, they actually moved back to Cork, and and she took over the family, and she took over looking after the family, and therefore didn't become a nun. And she went to teach in St. Angela's School in Cork. But she was working with the suffragettes first, and then she was working at the nationalist movement. So we were working with both and coming them on, and she was in both. Except when the war broke out in 1914. Then the people who were running the suffragettes, which tended to be wealthy sort of Anglo-Irish Protestant ladies, and by the way, the whole thing about hunger strikes actually started with the suffragettes in London. So it didn't start Terence MacSwiney, it was there from before, and they were treated really, really badly, which is not something we want to even think about. But when the war broke out, they wanted them to collect money for ambulances to send out to the war effort and to support the war effort, and that's where Mary McSweeney broke with them and said she wasn't really keen on that. And then there was an issue, which is in the book Soul of Fire, about her, where she said she had a choice between which to do first. And so suffragettes or Free Ireland, and she said, well, I think maybe we should free Ireland first, and then we look after women. And it was a typical, practical, logical decision for somebody like that to make. It wasn't that she was banning the other one, but she just wanted to do that one first. Jumping on a little bit, but just so as to see the interest. 1916, she's teaching in St. Angela's, and when you're teaching, there's just a direct relationship between you and your pupils, and everything's nice in camp. The next thing is 2 British soldiers come in and arrest her, frog march her out. It was a bit of a surprise. But so, we're talking about a conflict between the two worlds. Talk about 1916. I mean, we all know about the problems about it being cancelled and being brought on again and cancelled again and so on. What was Terence MacSwiney doing on that night? When they were in the volunteer hall, himself and Ross McCurtain trying to decide what do we do, they had called out volunteers who were armed, and then they sent them back. Do they call them out again? They thought they would all be arrested, they thought they'd all be picked up, they could have been all killed. Now, the issue was that before 1914 they had actually organised 1,000 volunteers. 970 joined in, went into the First World War. Now, restarting again, they were up to 1,000 again. To lose those would be disastrous. Now, the teaching connection is, he's looking for guidance. What's he doing? Just imagine walking up and down the hall 2, 3, 4 in the morning looking for guidance. What was he looking for guidance from? He was actually reading Thomas à Kempis, The Imitation of Christ. So it's appropriate that we are here in the Eucharistic presence, but it was The Imitation of Christ, that's what he was reading. And we have the 2 copies that he had of that, because that's what he was looking for when he was in jail. He was in jail more often than not for the last few years of his life. And he had 2 copies, and he was reading it in Irish. So to understand this, which is, it's a mystical book, and also to improve his Irish. So that's really, we're talking seriously educational. The other sisters are very interesting. Mary McSweeney, as we know, with her sister Annie, set up a Scolesia after being, thrown out of St. Angela's, and which is a difficult situation. With the help of borrowed money, very feisty people. As time goes on, with the new state, still very feisty people. An exam paper comes down from Dublin, and in it was a question, something to reference to Northern Ireland or something like that. And she reading the exam papers, and she crosses off that question. My girls are not going to answer a question like that. So, seriously interested in education, but seriously, let's say, feisty about it, which was a little bit difficult. But so you have to think of they're combining education with let's say, an independent-mindedness. I'll come back to Mary again in a minute, just to let you know about some of the others. Mary had an issue. She had an infection in her foot very, very young, and so she had to have her ankle amputated, and so she had a club foot. So she had difficulty walking, and she didn't live as long. She died in 1942, but Annie, her sister, who she ran the school with, lived to 1953. So I do remember her. Very famous in West Kerry, where we happen to live now, because they always wore black, and they would walk over the hill, and you'd know which one was which because one of them was limping. But they were very feisty people. Mary taught mathematics and Latin and history, I think, and she was very good at Latin, but she wasn't very good at Irish. So one of our neighbours, they did a deal. He wanted to go for secondary teaching, so she taught him Latin and he taught her Irish. But it was always somewhat difficult because the accent was still very, very sort of sounded like English posh. But Annie lived a lot longer. So a lot of the Scoil pupils, and they still are there, some of them. Anglicanti is, Anglo-Buccal is one of them. And whenever they would meet, and I would be at some of these Scoil past pupils meetings, they would say, Miss Annie taught us not to lie. And the whole thing was, we were constantly getting into trouble because we were never allowed to lie. So it was a funny thing in the sense, they were very proud of it, but it says they laid fierce burdens on them. They had no money. They did have fees, but it all went on fires to heat the place. And I mean, they just basically, lived that way. But I do remember Annie, and we would have called, there would have been called Auntie Peg, Auntie Kate, and Auntie Maura, and Auntie Ina, as they call her. So very principled, very strong, and very much supporting the men, as they would say, but it was all about education. Actually, of all of them, in a way, maybe my favourite was Auntie Peg. And again, the history thing, the teaching is really interesting. She joined a convent. Actually, what happened was Mary was going to be in a convent in England. She said, I'm the head of the family, I have to come back, and so on. So I think that Peg went in her place over to England to join. Anyway, she joins, become on, become a teacher, they settle down, and it's going to be the issue, and no problem at all. And then they were called Mother. She was Mother Margaret. So they're all Mother at that time. And Reverend Mother says, Mother Margaret, I would like you and Mother such and such to go to America to set up a school. Yes, Reverend Mother. You never said no, Reverend Mother. You said yes, Reverend Mother. So they gave her some money. They get on a boat and off you go, and it goes across the Atlantic to North Carolina to set up a school. And that's it. So you buy a bit of land and you organise things and you get permissions and you go all sorts of bureaucracy and stuff like that. And then they got to the point and said, well, we've got the land, we've got the building, and we're about to appoint teachers, but according to the regulations, this is going to be a middle college. So it's not a pure high school and not a university, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So now it could be called a community college. And they said, we've done that, and according to the regulations, we've been told that the head of the college is going to be called a dean and has to have a PhD. So can you give us the authority to go and find this person? And back comes the telegram. Mother Margaret, you do the PhD. That was it. Now, so to understand this, education, the MacSwineys, whatever it is, you do it, and that's it. So every weekend she used to go up to the Catholic University in Washington to do the PhD. And she did that over the next year or two. And so what do you do the PhD in? Well, there was a famous German mystical theologian called Rudolf Eichen, who was somewhat doubtful because he came up with these amazing insights. He's kind of a New Age person at that time. And basically, she tore him apart in 4 languages, not Irish, which he would have had. So 4 other languages: English, Latin, French, and German. Tore him apart. And by the way, it was so good at PhD that it's still on the internet, it still can be available, it's still, you actually could buy it. So, and then she became the dean for the next 30 years. And then after 30 years as dean, then went back to teaching. So, we're talking about feisty people. It's not just Terence MacSwiney, we're talking about seriously feisty people. As I say, I really found a peg. As regards Auntie Kit, she did the same thing, but off in Japan. So the sad thing is that we know nothing about anything about what happened in Japan, except that she came back once, and by accident, it's almost like a miracle. At that time, nuns who were gone on the missions were only allowed once back to their homeland, and Peg and Kit happened to come back at the same time. So we have a photograph of the 4 sisters outside the house in Kerry, and my mother was wearing, it's in History's Daughter, which my mother's wearing kimonos and Japanese umbrellas and stuff like that, which she got from Kit. And always we could remember her saying is, pray for Catholic husbands, because the problem was it was such a male-dominated society. You know, even at the best of education, that then would end up marrying somebody and saying, no, that's enough of that nonsense now, and go back to the other stuff. So the only other story I have about it is worth knowing about it because it does involve, turns out, 2 brothers, Sean and Peter. Peter happened to be my godfather, who I never met, and died when he was just 9 months after my birth. But anyway, there was in Tokyo there was a huge earthquake, and Peter said, "My God, what about Kit?" And he was living in New York at the time, and he thumbed his way across America. And he got onto a boat, and he said he wanted to go on a ship going to Japan. And the captain of the ship said, "What can you do? Can you do anything? Can you do? I can do anything. You know. Oh, could you pilot a ship? Oh yeah, of course I could do anything. Just so as to get on." Anyway, he arrives into Tokyo Harbour, and the captain says, "Okay, so you take her in." He actually did take the ship in, which you're not meant to do, you know. Anyway, he did. Turned out that the earthquake hadn't hit that place, so she was okay, so he came back. So, just to go on a little bit further back to Terence MacSwiney, everything that he did, basically he was an author, he was a writer. And if you look at the things that he wrote, it was teaching people. I mean, he had one book that he wrote, which is one incredibly long poem called The Music of Freedom. And it's just a big, long poem. And it is to inspire people about freedom. He wrote plays. He helped to set up with Daniel Corker and others different movements, basically inspired by Thomas Davis. So you have the Thomas Davis Society, then your Cork Literary Society, you have different societies setting up with others. Then writing plays, very much in plays. So there was a separate movement here in Cork compared to what was in Dublin. So people think everything was happening with the Yeatses and stuff like that. There was a separate movement here. And actually Ibsen was the important influence in Cork. And it wasn't not just in Cork. I mean, James Joyce learnt Danish so as to read Ibsen, so as to understand his plays. So there's a very significant influence. So that was the influence on their plays and the Cork Dramatic Society. And he wrote plays for that. But one of them was, and again, it's a teaching thing. It was playing The Revolutionists, which was subsequently changed a lot of things. Actually, after the hunger strike, around the time of the hunger strike, W.B. Yeats put on the Revolutionists in Dublin, and they had been losing money, the abbey had been losing money, and it filled the houses, and actually there was a turning around for the abbey, which is an interesting thing that wouldn't have thought. But in it, he's actually visualizing the kind of life of somebody who takes on the challenges. Again, he's educating people as to how to actually do this sort of thing, modelled to a great extent on Parnell, but then a lot of it became a model of what happened to him subsequently, because it's all really about a person who gives his life in trying to motivate and try and encourage people to get freedom. Go back a bit just to Mary, just to give you an idea of the sort of things that they were doing and the broadness of their education. It was very strongly Christian. So at certain points they were challenged by different people. And in one case she was challenged by the Bishop of Cork that she had taken some money that was meant for prisoners. And she challenged the bishop to withdraw. And he didn't, so she took him to court. Vatican court. So we're talking about strong women in education, but in a broad sense, who actually said, I think we need to teach these people that you don't tell lies about somebody and think you can get away with it. So there's a teaching that is going on and on and on. Did she win? Well, we call it a win in the sense that the courses, that the case went on and on and on, and so there was no finish to it, except that subsequently the bishop made some nice statement about her at some confirmation ceremony, and she said that's not a retraction. So a lot of strength in those. The whole family. Go on further to what exactly Terence MacSwiney was doing and the approach that he took. You see, the whole approach of fighting the English is one thing. But really, it wasn't going to be enough just to fight the English. You had to do something more. And basically the approach that he took after the assassination of Thomas McCurtain, where he made two speeches, and one taking on the job as Lord Maire, and the other one then when he was arrested in a speech before the Dock. And if you read those, it's an education to the British that you don't do this sort of thing and get away with it. In other words, he is saying this is a corrupt empire. And if you go back then to where did he start? He was working as an accountant in Dwyer's in Cork. And he was looking at what was happening. And he saw young people being corrupted by this corrupt empire. In other words, you work very hard and you help me get around that person, do something slightly wrong, I'll help you and you'll get on, you'll get promoted, and so on. And he saw people being corrupted. So it's the corruption of empire going all the way down, very down to the bottom, and corrupting the soul of the young people of Cork. So his whole thing was to reverse that corruption. So which means you're getting into the soul and you're livening the soul, you're then going back behind it to the spirit of the people, that the strength of their spirit, and then going back to the mind and actually enlivening the mind. So it was an education. And the idea was to educate. And so what he was doing in his hunger strike, and he wasn't the only one because there was over 60 people on hunger strike with him in Cork, and it wasn't the first time because they'd been many times doing it, but the idea was that it was to educate the empire and the leaders of the empire that you can't get away with this forever. Someone's going to stand up to you and it's going to teach you. And so people would say, oh, MacSwiney taught us how to die, but he also taught us how to live as people and how to actually achieve something. And so the things that he did actually had huge impact. So now we're talking about education almost as marketing or as promotion. Because when he was doing the hunger strike, it wasn't just as a protest, or it wasn't just as to show strong spirit, which is what Gandhi understood. And they had huge discussions in India. Was he right or was he wrong? Huge discussions in Catalonia. Was he right or was he wrong? Was he too extreme or not? He was going further, and is in essence taking the wind out of the sails of the empire. And the whole idea was to do that, and it has been happening ever since. And he showed, for instance, when he was in London, in Brixton Prison, Ho Chi Minh, later the leader of Vietnam, he was working in a hotel just down the road, and he was following this all the time. And at the end he said, "We've got a country where people like that won't easily be defeated." So he was actually educating him, which led to the Vietnam freeing itself. And of course, later, and McNamara said, "Well, at least we didn't let the Russians in." He said, "Here in Italy, we were just looking for our freedom, and we would have kicked you out, kicked the French out, kicked anybody else out. It was all about our own independence." And they got the inspiration from Terence MacSwiney. So we're talking about an inspiration, a form of teaching. So last week there was a book launched in Dublin on Ireland and China. And in it there's a chapter on Terence MacSwiney and Gua Marua. And Gua Marua will be the most important poet in China. He would be the W.B. Yeats of China. And I actually have it in the car with me, so if you're down at the museum tomorrow, I can show it to you. But he was actually working in Japan at the time, and he was working on poetry and stuff like that, as people would, and he was constantly getting the news, and he was getting a telegram every day, how is Terence MacSwiney doing? And he was totally inspired by Terence MacSwiney. And he was the new wave. So you had the old type of poetry, which is very sort of traditional, very formalised, and this was very unformalised, full of declamatory statements, and, MacSwiney still lives, and whatever. And he wrote this poem day by day over 2 months of Terence MacSwiney's dying. And it had a huge impact on China. So we're talking about something that goes even further. Now, just a few days ago, a very good Corkman gave me a copy of a newspaper, 4 editions of a newspaper from Massachusetts. And I was going to bring along now, except that it's quite battered, so I'm giving it to the museum. And 4 editions of the newspaper have MacSwiney dying, and then MacSwiney dead. And then the 3rd edition, who is going to get the body, and then final one, the retrospective. Huge impact. And you only have to see these to realise this is what people are reading daily. Further, there's Argentina, Catalonia, all over. Actually, it was an education of the world. And so, in a way, he took education to a new height. And what you're talking about is working out what is right and then pursuing what is right. And it isn't about battling, it's actually working out the right thing. And his 100-year anniversary is next October, this time next year. And really, the working out of what is right and teaching people about what is right is the sort of approach that will be needed politically to deal with issues ongoing into this major change, because the world has reached the end of an era where we can exploit all the resources as much as we like and won't make any difference. From now on into the future, we're actually going to have to be more careful. We're going to have to teach people and to actually do it right and get it right. And the inspiration, I think, will come from people like Terence MacSwiney in terms of what they did educationally. So that's basically what I wanted to tell you about. Maybe there is another aspect there which is worth reflecting on, and that is he spent so much of his time in the Gaeltacht. He changed over, he was a Cork City boy, he changed over to working and teaching and learning and loving and living in the Irish language. And it turns out that the English language is a language of colonialisation. It doesn't even name the bad things that they do because they don't want people to know about it. When you express it in the Irish language, then you realise what is really happening. And so the unifying force for Ireland, for the future, will be its people. And it will be its people that are joined together and united by their own culture and by the values that are in that culture. And essentially, that is something that is intimately tied to teaching and to learning. And so, if anything, if you were here now, you might say to me, "Can I have an alert in these small squaling?" or something like that. So, one last thing, just so to bring you back to the challenges that happened subsequently with Mary McSweeney and Annie. As you know, things went a little bit difficult afterwards, and won't be celebrating, we'll be commemorating the treaty and the Civil War and so on. And one of the people that Terence MacSwiney appointed, and he was Lord Maire, was the head of the Republican Police, Dennis Barry, Donegal de Barra. Anyway, things happened and he got arrested during the Civil War and caught a cold. I mean, the conditions where he was living were very wet and very cold and so on. And even though he had been a great hurler and a fantastic sportsman, he died and he wasn't treated properly. And so he died and his body was brought into Cork. But because of, let's say, issues to do with the over-controlling nature of the hierarchy, as against the ordinary priests and nuns and Catholics and so on, they said his body wasn't going to be allowed into any church in Cork or be officiated by any priest or any bishop. So, what happened? Mary and Annie McSweeney looked after the funeral. So, we're talking about people, we're talking about an independent spirit of mind. You're taught, you're a Christian, you have a duty to a fellow Christian, and you deal with it. So this comes out of the education approach as against the subjugation approach. They were not subjugated, and it was this. You're taught to do this. This is a fellow Christian. So when you go out to St. Finbar Cemetery and you see the three graves, it's Moss McCurtain in the middle and Terence MacSweeney. The third one is Dennis Barry, Donegal de Barra. Just to remember that sometimes it's not easy, but you're following what is true in your mind when you're working with education. So that's really my story. It's a story about a family, an inheritance of going way back, the MacSweeneys and so on, which is spirited and teaching, Maxine, and see wise people and so on, but also strong in terms of independent mindedness, and then a huge spirituality from their mother, Mary Wilkinson, and bringing on forward, but ultimately teaching the world, whether it's in Japan, and the school is still there in North Carolina. It has been changed name after name, gone through various different things, but it still is there. The school is there in North Carolina. The impact is still there. I mean, twice I've been invited to Catalonia to speak about their independence movement. And there still is the need for teaching. They actually they said that at the time of his hunger strike, they had been more Redmondite, and then they learned from him and they changed. And then the leader of Barcelona wanted to name a street after him. And we still have the same problem then as now, except a bit worse then. Franco had him arrested and had him hanged, and he was the leader of Barcelona. He was the mayor. So, bad situation. But they learned from MacSwiney that there was a better way. But still there is an issue, because 45% of them would want total freedom from Spain, and 45% of them would want to be totally under Spain, under Madrid and so on. And the thing I've spoken about twice, and it's really reflecting Terence MacSwiney's view, is that there is a middle route, much more independence and interdependence, but not giving too much power to Madrid and not separating entirely. Now, so if you were to have Terence MacSwiney here now, he would be talking much more about we are part of Europe. And within Europe, we should have fellow feeling for the people of Catalonia, or for the Kurds. I mean, they're essentially what we are, but in their own country. And he would be saying, connect internationally, because this is right for them, and it's right for us, and it's the right way to go. So, Sin mar scéal nádar an cumí ráda ach tá sibh go léir I gcairí fuar ach go háire agus so stop my mate nish go market.
So I would just like to add my thanks to CATHAL MacSWINEY Brugha and just say that it was a very enlightening opening remarks. I'm also aware that everybody's fairly cold now at this stage, so I will just to add that there was now a reception in the Heritage Room, the museum across the way. You are all welcome to join us for a glass or something to eat, a hot drink or something to eat. For those of you who have a ticket, the event is free. For those who would like to join us but are not here for the rest of the weekend, there is, however, a €5 charge. So I think with that all being said, I think everyone would like to go for a hot drink, so we'll head over now. Thank you again, folks. And thanks again, Colin.